The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back. You are comfortably zoned with me, the Zig Zag Man in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland, in the northern part of the westernmost state in the country, tied with a few. And I must say, happy to be here. Grew up in New York, living in California my adult life. One of the things about doing podcast radio, I could reminisce about my days living in New York, and sometimes I get to do it with an upstate New Yorker. Jay LaFountaine is my guest. Welcome to the zone for the first time.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's my pleasure, and I'll tell you why. Syracuse was one of the original 8 teams in the National Basketball Association. And when I was growing up, you could go to the Madison Square Garden on a Wednesday, for instance, and see half of the league playing a doubleheader. It was really great. And you have a basketball blog or page, whatever you call it, on Facebook that is absolutely great reading. You talk about the Nats in, if I'm not mistaken, the year you blog is 1959 and 1960. Tell me what the NBA was like for you, and we'll talk about Dolph Schayes, my boyhood hero, later on.
Well, the Syracuse Nationals were in Syracuse from 1946 through 1963, and I didn't come along until 1975 myself, so I missed out on those years. But in this span of those 17 years, they played for 2 different leagues. They played for the National Basketball League, and they merged in 1949 with the Basketball Association of America to become the National Basketball Association. And Dolph Schayes was around for that. We got him in our 3rd year in the National Basketball League in the 1948-49 season. He came as a rookie out of New York University. And we mentioned briefly that he was won over by the Nats for a little bit more money than the Knicks were willing to pay from the Basketball Association of America. The Basketball Association had a $5,000 rookie salary cap, and in the National Basketball League there was no such salary cap. So Leo Ferris, who was the vice president of the National Basketball League at the time, met up with Dolph and offered him the same $5,000 with a $2,500 signing bonus. And to entice him, he left a roll of bills right in front of Dolph. And Dolph eventually signed and would comment later on that roll of bills. He looked at the roll of bills afterward, and it was 100 rolled up $1 bills. So he said he would have held out for a little bit more had he known they were all ones.
Yeah, well, we all sell ourselves short once in a while. It's he was just instrumental in legitimizing the NBA. And I'll tell you how. I read this in your blog that in 1959, when Wilt came in the league, Wilt Chamberlain, the foul line, not the foul line, the lane was like a T. And Dolph Schayes realized that although Wilt was a terrific athlete, this, that, and the other thing, dominating, he was much more dominating in that tee than he should have been. They weren't calling the 3-second rule. And Schayes was really the guiding light in changing the foul line, the foul lane, and opening it up so that a ball player couldn't just dwell in there and this, that, and the other thing. He was also one super scorer early on. Tell me about some of his escapades.
Well, Dolph could score from anywhere on the court. In 1952, I believe, he broke his hand, his right hand. He's a right-hander. And when he got his cast fitted on by the doctor, he said, "Keep my fingers loose." So they only put the cast up his hand up until the base of his fingers. So he was able to grip the ball still, but he taught himself how to become a left-handed shooter, how to dribble left-handed, how to play his game left-handed. And that was just terrible for anybody else that already had to guard him. Just guarding Dolph Schayes was a chore in itself. You had to be physically fit. Dolph Schayes never stood still on the court. There was always some place to go. Even without the ball, Dolph Schayes was moving around, setting a pick, getting himself open, raising an arm, just tiring his opponent out. And when he went from being a right-hander to ambidextrous, basically from that point forward in 1952 through the rest of his career in 1964, he became that much more dangerous as a scorer. Now, he was more of a slash and draw the foul type of guy. He wasn't big by center comparison. You mentioned Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt was over 7 feet, maybe 7 foot, conservatively 7'1", and he just didn't have the physical frame to compete with centers like George Mikan and Mel or what was his name, Don Otten. So those 6'10", 6'11", 7 foot guys were just too big for Dolph to kind of get his footing and try and camp out and do whatever. So he would have to develop a shot outside, and it was called the Rainmaker because everybody would joke that Dolph's shots would touch the clouds. He threw them so high, and amazingly they would swish, and he had a pretty decent percentage for a guy his height from shooting outside. He played like a guard. He learned how to play New York City basketball.
Yes, and he had the advantage of playing with a forecourt in Syracuse that featured passers. George Yardley was a terrific passer. Red Kerr was a terrific passer. Mm-hmm. And that really helped. If they had Wilt as a dominant center, oh my God, Larry Costello, Greer, all those guys. And ironically, when they moved to Philadelphia, they did get Wilt and blossomed along with Lucius Jackson. Holdovers from Syracuse included Costello and the like. And it was just too bad for Syracuse that move came about.
Yeah, it was inevitable. Every year there was always talk about, will Syracuse be able to financially stay in the league? When westward expansion happened, that was pretty much the nail in the coffin when the Minneapolis Lakers moved to Los Angeles. And I think the Philadelphia Warriors moving to the San Francisco area, that pretty much
1962, yeah.
Yep, 1962. And that left a void in the Philadelphia market. And all that year from 1962 to 1963, all the papers talked about was it was more of a foreshadowing than anything that Syracuse, they're the last small market team in the league. It's going to happen. They're not going to be able to compete with the player salaries or the travel costs associated, or especially charging the ticket prices, and the fact that they're notorious for having up and down attendance numbers. So it was going to happen, and they projected all year that Syracuse was going to move, even though Danny Biasone would go ahead and deny as much as he could and really fight and struggle to keep that team there. It was inevitable, and it was either Baltimore, it was either Chicago, or it was either or Philadelphia that they were going to eventually go to. And we all know that they ended up becoming the 76ers after 1963.
Right. It seems that that it was an even flow, replacing the Warriors, who had moved out to San Francisco with the Sixers. Let me ask you a question. In your history lessons, did you come across a guy named Millman, who was the Philadelphia 76er ball boy, who made up the sign when Wilt scored 100 points? Remember he's depicted with that 100 picture. My friend Jeff Millman made that sign up. The late Jeff Millman had been at that time was the Philadelphia ball boy, and he went on to a career in management with the Sixers. He was just a great guy, and I'm thrilled every time I look at that picture of Wilt scoring 100 to look at that. But that's neither here nor there. I want to find out something about you, Jay. It fascinates me that you're this learned about early NBA, and like you say, you didn't come along till 1975.
Yeah, I got into basketball.
Where did that passion come from?
I got into basketball because my father would get season tickets to the Syracuse Orangemen at the time in the Carrier Dome. And one of the ways that we would hang out with our father is we would go to these games with him because my parents weren't together anymore, and that's how we hung out with my father, was sporting events, and eventually he opened up a sports card shop, and we hung out there with him a lot. But I got into Syracuse University basketball, and they would bring in NBA teams for exhibitions. And one year they brought in the New Jersey Nets, who had their first-round draft pick, Derek Coleman, from Syracuse University, and they brought a team in to play him with a guy named Michael Jordan. You may have heard of him. And I started collecting the basketball cards and following it and watching 80s and 90s basketball, which is completely different from basketball today. It was a tougher game, and it was even tougher back in those days. But then I started slowly learning about Syracuse, and someone had mentioned Syracuse won an NBA championship. And I thought, well, really, why would Syracuse have an NBA championship? And looking into it a little while, I found out that Syracuse did have a team, and they did win an NBA championship in 1955. And this was around oops. You still there? All right. So I found out that that these nationals existed, and I just started just reading and collecting all the information I could about this team, and I feel like I'm a fan of a team that no longer exists, and I don't follow NBA basketball like I did in the past, now current basketball, but I do follow the past basketball. That's how I really got into learning who the Syracuse Nationals were.
Well, one more player I have to ask you about, now that I know where your passion comes from, is my boyhood camp counselor at Kittatinny Camp in the Poconos was Barney Cable. And you write about him on a regular basis. He went from Syracuse to a number of teams in the NBA, and he was a good, solid ball player from Bradley. And I wonder if you can give me some info about Barney Cable. that can stick in my head for the next
the
40
Nats
years.
They were really sad to lose Barney Cable. He came to them and was giving them solid. I mean, he was just a solid contributing basketball player. He brought in the rebounds. He was able to fill up a lane. He wasn't a small guy, but when the NBA expansion happened, the teams could only protect so many players. And, of course, Syracuse protected Johnny Kerr and Larry Costello and Greer. I mean, they had all these players that they had to protect, and Barney Cable was put on the unprotected list. He ended up getting picked up by the Chicago Packers and ended up getting sent over to the Chicago Packers in the expansion draft. And Danny Biasone in the newspaper said, "Man, I wish I never lost Barney Cable." They loved Barney Cable. Now, they ended up bringing in a similar type guy who was a little bit older than Barney Cable, not quite, maybe on the dumb end of his own prime, but Joe Grabowski. But they really lost
from the Philadelphia Warriors.
Yep, they brought in Joe Grabowski to kind of replace him. He's a similar type player. And then Danny Biasone was a little angry during that season because the Chicago and St. Louis Hawks ended up engineering a trade. So basically the Chicago team took Barney Cable away and then shipped him off to the Hawks. And Danny Biasone wanted to try and get Cable back, but unfortunately was unable to.
And Barney had some good years with the Hawks. It was right after a merger with the ABA. And players like Barnhill were coming over to, and Zilmo Beatty and Barnhill, and Pettit was getting a little old, but they still had
Hagen.
Hagen, right? Exactly. And Barney contributed. And as a New Yorker, I remember being able to listen to the St. Louis games that he was playing in, KMOX radio, to pick it up Chicago to New York. They were that strong a station. And what a thrill when your counselor, a guy who was just so communicative and such an easygoing, great guy, told me a little bit about his career and the NBA. He said, if you score 20 points in the NBA, they want you to do it every night. And it puts pressure on you. He was the kind of guy who spread the wealth. He would just as soon get an assist and score a basket. Told me a lot about him and a lot about basketball, which is a team sport. And it really doesn't matter who gets the 2 points, other than the team gets the 2 points. And when I think of Syracuse with guys like Costello, Al Bianchi, another solid guard who was unselfish at the time.
He was another AVA player too. He ended up going to the Virginia Squires and coached them as well.
Yes. After the NBA, it's amazing that politics sometimes. I'm thinking of Doug Moe and others who made their bones in the ABA. It was a different game then. Tell me in your words how it was a different game from a player standpoint at that time.
Between the ABA and the NBA?
Between basketball as we knew it and basketball as we know it to be now.
Oh, basketball as we knew it was a tougher game. You come into the lane and you try and score underneath against those big guys. they were going to throw a body at you, and sometimes you got clobbered. Nowadays, the defense is so spread out, and these guys are launching from every angle on the court to make a basket, and some of these guys can legitimately hit consecutive shots one after another. Stephon Curry can bomb from three-point land all day, and he's going to make a good amount of his shots. It's for him to go in and get clobbered, or even him to go in the lane and try and score, it's not worth it to him. He can go ahead and save his body from hanging out on the outside. But, you know, back in the days before the three-point line, these guys were in there, and a lot of the newspapers would call it yeoman work. They got in there and they put a body on somebody, they boxed them out, they got their rebounds, they got their assists, they got their 2 points, but every point was a hard-fought 2-point basket for them. So it's a lot different game than what it was back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I mean, even the game from the 50s to the 60s was different in a lot of respects as far as how the Mikan rule, which you explained earlier, where the lane had to be widened because these big guys could basically straddle the line and just hang out there, and they're not committing a violation because their feet aren't in the lane. And the 24-second clock, obviously, that changed the game completely. It's still 24 seconds to this day.
Right, and I think the other league had it at 30, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe you're correct on that. And the other league, they had innovations that the NBA certainly wasn't willing to experiment with.
Right.
The ABA brought about the three-pointer, and guys like Louis Dampier took advantage of that. And the ABA had the slam dunk contest, which the NBA still does to this day. So they took some good points from that league. They ended up getting 4 teams from the league that are still around. I want to say Indiana Pacers, San Antonio Spurs. The other 2 are escaping me right now, but 4 teams came from the ABA and absorbed into the NBA. Denver Nuggets was another one.
Okay.
So,
hey, listen, before we close this, I want to ask you about Syracuse University, the Orange Men. I think they're the Orange people. It's not.
Well, I think they just shortened it to the Orange.
Political correctness, and you can't even say Orange anymore. So
when they shortened it to Orange, in a way it didn't bother me personally, only because looking way back in the newspapers, and we're talking the 1910s, the 1920s, the 30s, they were the Syracuse Orange. The term Orangemen really didn't come around until late 50s and the 60s, and it just stuck around. So they were always the Syracuse Orange, and when it went, and that's a good point to bring up. It was a politically correct thing to do, but it really didn't change anything. It reverted back to the Syracuse Orange.
The original, the way it was originally.
The original, because that was their school color.
Hey, when I think of Cuse, as it was when I was a kid, we call it Cuse. I think you got to think Jimmy Brown, and I'll tell you a quick story. This is what I heard from someone way back, that Jimmy Brown was sitting in the athletic, the table for athletes. It was his first year, and the waitress comes over to him and says, "This is for Syracuse. This is for the Syracuse athletic department." And Jimmy Brown looks at her and says, "I am the Syracuse athletic department." And he was. What a tremendous athlete. Very few people know he played basketball as well, and he played lacrosse, was an All-American at lacrosse, was probably more known for his lacrosse at his Syracuse days than he was football. He was just simply a great athlete. You want to add to that at all, or talk about Jimmy? Or did I lose you? That's a possibility. You might have been offended by Jimmy, but I doubt it. That's not it. You'll call back in a minute. In the meantime, I'm going to take a station break, put it on hold, and we'll hear from you in a second. Hey, we're having technical problems. Could not get back with Jay. I'm going to close this out, and we'll talk to him again. What a great guest. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. We were with Jay LaFountaine, and we'll be back next time, whether he's with us or not. Happy trails, everybody.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.